Hello, everybody. I'm Marcia McKerrow, and I'm here today with Quentin Kopp, who is the chairman of Pollywood Limited. Hi, Quentin.
Hi, Marcia. Our website with Pollywood is www.pollywood-natural.com, where you can see an overview of our business.
Fantastic. Now, Quentin, you've had such a varied career and a long career and done a lot of different roles throughout your working life. But I'm interested to start with understanding a little bit more about Pollywood and what it's all about.
Well, it's exciting a lot of people. It's excited sustainability today. We've just won an award for Construction Material Company of the Year, and we haven't sold an inch of it yet. Pollywood is the invention of a guy called Steve Crichton. Steve has worked in the wood industry in various ways all his working life. One day he approached a roundabout just underneath, near Middlesbrough, and he saw that the traffic light was made of glass fibre, and that annoyed him because he thought there has to be a way we can do something better in wood than that, because that's high carbon and horrible. And that led to the development of Pollywood, which is an amazing material. The raw materials we've just had tested before we have a full product tested, but the raw materials configured have a strength to weight ratio that's more than 14 times stronger than steel.
Wow, that's impressive.
And it's got an environmental impact that's very low. We've had that tested too.
Fantastic. So where do you think you'll be able to use this new
material? The first people that came across us when we were in our early stages of development, we'd made a proof of concept, was a company called the Energy Innovation Centre.
Right.
And they are a not-for-profit business that are funded by the people who distribute, well, then it was just gas and electricity, but now they also work for the water companies. And in the last couple of months, they've taken on Network Rail. And their role is, because the regulators of all these industries are putting them under pressure to improve through innovation. And often, people get complacent if they've been supplying something, and in terms of what we're developing, which is a replacement for the wooden creosoted pole that carries electricity lines, which hasn't seen any development in 100 years, you can understand they can get complacent.
Yeah.
And so what EIC do, the Energy Innovation Centre, EIC, is they scour the world looking for innovative ideas, and they heard about us and invited us. So our first application will be utility poles, which could be used for electricity or telecoms.
Where are they based? Are they UK based or are they based abroad?
No, we're very much UK based. The business is based in on Teesside. There are three members of the team at the moment, myself and Steve Crichton, who I've mentioned. Steve lives just south of Stockton on Tees. And Richard Bruff, who's our engineer, he's a development director, who's an interesting case in himself. I'll come back to him in a second. We based in what's called the Materials Processing Institute, which was British Steel's research arm. They're now a not-for-profit, and they do research for all sorts of people and provide facilities for aspiring SMEs like us. Coming back to Richard, Richard's would have just turned 40 when we came across him. He's a man with a young family, and he had been in the army. He'd worked in financial services, but he has a very inventive, problem-solving brain. And he wanted to give himself some proper structure. So he enrolled as a mature student at Teesside University and studied engineering. And the university did a round robin to employers at the end of his first year and said, would you like a student for 6 weeks? He's been with us ever since. And
That's a good placement.
Well, the point was that he believed he could do better, and he loves the way that we give him his head. We don't spend our time sitting on his shoulder telling him to do stuff. We tell him what needs to be done, and he finds a way to do it, and gets every support from us to do that.
So is it the IEC that you talked about earlier? Where are they based?
EIC.
EIC.
Yeah, they're based in Ellesmere Port on the Wirral.
Right. Okay. So they're UK based as well.
Yeah, everything's UK based. I mean, the electricity distribution companies are the people you don't really know about until you have a power cut. If you look up the telephone number to ring when you get a power cut, in our case here locally, it's a business called Western Power Distribution, who cover a huge swathe of land. They cover all the southwest, Devon, Cornwall, Dorset, South Wales, all the West Midlands, and all the East Midlands. So everything apart from Humberside across. So as I say, they go from Land's End to Skeggy.
I know from my own experience that running a business comes with pros and cons. What have been the challenges for you in terms of setting up Pollywood and running that business, and how have you overcome them?
The biggest and the perennial problem when you're developing something that's entirely new, it's never been done before, it's not like we're ripping somebody else's ideas off, it's a world first, is getting the funding to do it. The electricity Northern Power Grid, who cover from Scotland to North Humberside, down the east side of the country, which is a company that's owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, are incredibly enthusiastic, but none of these companies move very fast. And it's scary, because at times you are running out of money, and we're right on the cusp now, and we're about to make a bid for a significant amount of money, which will enable us to get the product commercialized.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So, I mentioned earlier about your career and how varied it's been. I know you've been a managing director of a company, and before that you were a director of HR. How have those roles in your past prepared you for being a chairman of an organisation like this one?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, early on I set myself goals. I wanted to be an HR director before I was 30, tick, done. I wanted to be a managing director before I was 40, also achieved. When I became managing director of the first business that I ran for Coates Viella, we did a show to show new ranges to Marks and Spencer's at our head office in Savile Row, and before they came in, possibly because we got a lot of very nice long-legged ladies wearing these garments, the chairman came in and he spoke to me, and he said, this is a big change for you. And I said, in one way, of course it is, but in another way it isn't, because if you're going to be effective as a personnel director, and you're going to be effective as a managing director, there are two or three things that both jobs need. One, they have to be very good at listening. Two, they have to be accessible to people, but not in anybody's pocket. And getting that balance between accessibility and distance if you've been an HR director is much less difficult than it is if you've been a line director of some sort. So the way I described it, and interestingly, it's a concept I saw used by two academics who were then at Exeter, now at Oxford, in their book, Why Should Anybody Be Led By You? Is I described it as being a chameleon. You know, that you're blue to somebody, green to somebody else, red to somebody else, because you're picking the right way for that person.
Yeah.
But
Really
the core,
important.
the same person is there all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, fabulous. Yeah.
So what drove all that, and what made me be picked out to be a managing director from an unusual place, was I have a burning desire to improve things, and to help people improve things, and help people improve themselves. And that was what was recognised, because I got stuck into solving problems that weren't HR problems, but if they weren't solved, they would have created HR problems.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look back and reflect back on your earlier career,
yeah,
are there things that you would have done differently, or all the boxes checked in the right order, or you're happy with the way things have gone?
There are times when I probably regret not moving faster with things. Right at the beginning of my career, I probably could have been more forthright. My first employment, but while it's important to reflect and learn as you go along, fundamentally, what I've done is tried to do what I was supposed to be doing well, but was always open to opportunity. And so that's how it happened. I mean, we became involved when I was at Coast Viola, for example, with Warwick University, Warwick Manufacturing, and I employed a couple of their end-stock students to do a project for me, which led to me sending students on that program because I liked it, which led to me being invited to be an evening speaker,
Yeah.
which led to them giving me work. And in fact, they encouraged me to go independent as a consultant.
Wow.
Coast Viola decided to close the division I was running. So I had a choice. I could stay and do the next thing they'd asked me to do, or I could do something different. And I took that step, which is always scary, as you know, being self-employed, when you move from having a salary come in every month. And that's what it's been like since mid-1998. It's scary. I mean, we don't, Steve and I don't pay ourselves unless there's money there to pay ourselves. So.
Yeah. How would you define success?
How would I define success? It's success. Success is defined by what happens as a consequence of it. And what happens as a consequence of it, for example, when I ran the first business I ran, it wasn't success for me. Wasn't that we turned our business round, because it was within 18 months of taking it over, all the products we were selling to Marks and Spencers were discontinued. So the 8% on sales that we were making wouldn't have lasted very long. What constituted was success was that we took 3 major retailers and doubled their market shares. And in consequence, we created a much better situation for our supply chain, our employees, and their customers as well as them. Yeah. Because we created something very unique. And in fact, I was talking to a management consultant the other day in some networking context, and he was asking me some of the things I did, and he was absolutely staggered. He said, "You were doing that in the late 1980s. People aren't doing that now." So success to me is in somebody else's eyes. It's not my own. It's what do we achieve for somebody else?
Right. Okay. That's interesting, because my next question was going to be, so by your description or definition, do you class yourself as successful?
I'm always trying, always trying to be achieve these things for other people. I mean, if we come back to Pollywood, the potential for Pollywood is absolutely enormous, because wherever you see steel, aluminium, bricks currently, you could see Pollywood. And what you would have is something that's got, I mean, an independent assessment by a body in the Northeast called NAREC assessed us against a telegraph pole, and we will have 10% of the environmental impact of a product that's not is 100% wood plus the gunk they stick on it to preserve it. That's pretty stunning.
Yeah.
And when you think about those strength to weight ratios, you think about a building, it has a steel RSJ going across to support things above it. Because that's so heavy, these have to be heavy.
Yeah.
Well, if that is 10% of the weight of that, then the whole concept of the building could be totally different.
14 times stronger.
No, the strength to weight. So,
yeah.
So it'd be 14 times lighter to achieve the same strength.
Yeah. Crikey. You've talked about, you know, your work with Warwick University, and I know you've done a lot of stuff around, you know, reviewing books and teaching and lecturing at the university. And I can see from the setting that you're in now that you love your books and your texts.
Yes.
Is there any particular books that you've read recently that are or have had an impact on you and your business? And could you share that with us?
Well, the book reviewing was for the Chartered Management Institute's Management Book of the Year, but a lot of these things I've given them up because Pollywood is now all consuming. If I was to recommend a book to people to take a better approach to leadership, or an author, I would recommend Simon Sinnott.
Simon Sinnott.
Sinnott, yeah, he's hold on, where's his books? He's written books on leadership where he describes, for example, the role of a combat commander in the field is not look after himself, but it's to look after everybody else. In other words, what he's doing is describing a form of servant leadership where you define the goals as the leader and you make sure that people have got the tools and support to do their job. It's not about directing them. It's about encouraging them. Sinnott also is strong on communication. He has a book called Start With Why, which is one of his most famous books. It's probably the most looked at lecture on, what's the channel where they do all the lectures? Oh dear, I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head. It doesn't matter, but he's if you think if you're trying to persuade somebody about something, whether you're selling a product or not, he said you should start with why rather than the how or the what. And if you think about it, I mean, it hasn't worked on me, but it's worked on millions of people. because I haven't got.
You
I haven't.
are a different breed altogether, Q.
I, I haven't got a single product from Apple because I didn't spend my. I don't wander around with earplugs and music and what have you. But if you think about the pitch for an Apple computer, it's not, here's a computer, it's got so much this and so much that, and it can enable you to do this. They start with saying, in effect, isn't this a beautiful object? And oh, by the way, it can do all these things. So the why is, let's make something beautiful that you want to work with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got a lot of time for Simon Sinnott, and he's actually got a couple of new books out, not too recent past, which I haven't had a chance to get hold of yet. I've just been too busy with Pollywood.
I will be adding him to my list of reading.
I'll send you some links so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I can add them when we post a video.
And then it'll be available for others. Yeah.
What strengths do you think you need to have? Well, not even strengths. What traits do you think you need to have longevity in business?
Well, first you've got to be clear about where you want to go. Secondly, you've got to have an ability to create followers. And some of the best leaders are people who have been the best followers.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely, because they're learning from other people as they're.
Yeah, well, I mean, too often people get to be the top because they're the biggest ego merchants in town. The old Peter principle still works. Yes, the best salesman does not necessarily make the best sales manager.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You need courage because there are always difficult things to face. Do you invest? Do you recognize early that actually any amount of development for a certain person isn't going to make them work in your environment? That doesn't mean they're a failure. It just means that you and them aren't designed to work together.
Yeah. And that's okay, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. When Steve and I first started working together, and this comes to another important point about longevity, when Steve and I first started, we met at an event that was organised called Pitch for Management, which was organised by an investment magazine. And it wasn't to say, somebody coming along and doing a pitch and saying, I need £2 million to build a new motor car or something. It was, this is my business and I need some help with such and such. And I met Steve at that, and I liked him. I think the whole. In fact, he hadn't realised how eco his concept was until I told him. I liked it, so I emailed him and said, I'd be happy to talk to you about helping you. So I had 2 meetings with him at his home of probably 3 hours each before we decided to work together. And that was fundamentally about making sure that our values were aligned. And in consequence, we've had people try to break us up. And we got a highly qualified gent who was given to us on under an ERDF scheme for a day's consultancy of a specialist chemist.
What's an ERDF scheme?
European Regional Development Fund.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
We've had quite a lot of money out of that, being in the northeast. Of course, we won't get any going forward.
We won't go into this discussion though. We haven't got time.
Anyway, this gentleman, a highly qualified PhD, he did some useful stuff for us. But after a bit, well, two things happened. One, I got feedback from the other two that when I was out of the way, he tried to bully them. And two, because he lived in Darlington and I come by train to Darlington, he was the guy who picked me up. And in the conversations we had in the car, it was very often his approach to customers, to suppliers, to people was just not Pollywood as Steve and I defined it. And, you know, however credible he was to the outside world, and he was stunting Richie's development and it wasn't going to work. So I parted company with him.
Yeah.
Now, it's so much better to do it that way, nicely. If it was somebody who was early in their career and all the rest of it, then I'd have done. I mean, for example, when we closed down the division that I told you about in Coates Villa, when I left Coates Villa, I set the HR person the objective of making sure that a minimum of 90% of the employees, and we were talking about, where were we? About 1,500 people scattered everywhere from South Wales to London, through the East Midlands and up into the west of Scotland, including a large factory in South Yorkshire, to get into jobs that were at least as well paying as the ones they were currently doing. And we achieved that. And so, for example, all the girls on sewing machines in that factory in South Yorkshire went on a program to learn Microsoft Office.
New skills to help them to move on to something else.
And by doing that, it costs money. But you're not sending people out into the world damaged. You're sending them out with a new perception of themselves. I mean, quite by chance, not long after that, around that time, I'd started to play golf for the first time. And the club still is where I play golf, beside Worksop College. And I turned up one day, and obviously I hadn't got anybody to play with at that point because I didn't know anybody. And the guy in charge of sorting out the times and who played and all that said, "Oh, I've got 3 people coming in a bit, because they do a lot of pay and play there rather than just members." He asked them if I could play with them. They said yes, and as you do, you're walking around the course talking. "Oh yes, what do you do? Where do you come from?" and all of that. And these 3 gentlemen all had wives who used to work for me at Maltby.
Wow.
That could have been death on the golf course.
A tricky conversation. A tricky game if you hadn't have been.
Well, they knew, as soon as I said my name, they knew who I was.
Yeah.
And they knew something important about me in relation to their wives.
Well, good stuff. All good stuff. And leaving those lasting memories in people's minds as well is really important, those interactions that we have.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you're a family man and you've now got a grandson, Felix.
Well, we've got 2. We've got one in China.
2 now. Okay. Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you about next is about the balance that you have between running Pollywood Limited and making sure you've got time for family. How does that work? How do you make that work when you're traveling all over?
Part of it works because since '98, I've had this extraordinarily long commute from the breakfast table to my study. So I'm in the house. So on a Tuesday, when Liz takes my car to teach in Nottingham, and Georgina can't take Felix to school, I'll take him to school.
Yeah.
Now, there are times when it's difficult. There are times when you're traveling and what have you. But there's the opportunities to put some balance there. And you know, if you're not focused on your work, then it's much worse for your family because there isn't any money.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. So, what advice would you give somebody who was just starting out in business?
Well, the first thing I would advise them to do, and this might sound very difficult for people or strange language, but is to get their values straight. You know, we ran a leadership program at Warwick University. My colleague is a very highly qualified psychologist, and one of the instruments she gave them to do tested the way people take their decisions. And there are some people who have principles and they make those decisions in line with those principles. Those principles could be ethical, they could be religious, they could be anything, but they have principles. At one end. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got people, and you see this more and more and more now, where the only thing that matters is the end. So the ends justify the means. And, you know, unfortunately, well, really, for a long time, but I mean, certainly since the mid and early 90s, they've had too many examples of politicians where that's the case. They've had too many examples of senior business leaders where that is the case. And if you get to the bottom of why businesses have failed, think about the banking crash, for example. Yeah, there's all sorts of business stuff, but underneath it all is ethical failure. People under pressure to achieve results, getting greedy, all these sort of failures. So to me, there is nothing more important to have a clear idea where you stand on ethical issues, and no amount of pressure can move you. I mean, for example, the person who promoted me to be managing director and I had quite a disagreement one day when well, two things. One there was a particular incident, and he said, "Don't for God's sake tell Marks and Spencer's that." And I'd got summoned down, and I went down. And the that, I won't go into that because it won't mean anything to anybody watching this. But that was part of the truth. It wasn't the whole truth. And I told them the whole truth. In consequence, instead of getting loads of fines and beaten up, we got a lot of help from Marks and Spencer's to achieve something that actually my boss wanted, which was that we would have independent control of our own warehousing rather than being a customer of an in-group company running warehousing. But he blew his stack when I got back. I said, fine. If you want to sack me for telling the truth, then sack me. I'll see you in the tribunal. And another time I fell out with him was he believed anybody could be bought. I said, well, keep bidding because you can't find my price. This is a bloke who was highly intelligent, who had come from an ordinary coal mine. His father was a coal miner near Wakefield. He was very bright. He'd gone to Leeds University, became a very senior researcher and developer for ICI before he joined the group. And in many ways, he was not a class snob. He was an intellectual snob. And you know, he recognised my brain, if you like, but he found it came with some other things that made him uncomfortable. But
I mean, the message I'm taking away there is, you know, stay true. Absolutely. It's that authenticity bit, isn't it? Stay true to your values. Absolutely. And actually, that's come through a number of the interviews that we've done. So it's really quite, good to hear that coming again as another message. Stay true to your own.
To me, it doesn't matter what skills you've got, what knowledge you've got. If you don't get that consistent, so people see a clear picture of you, you can't lead anybody.
Yeah.
And
that's so true.
You will upset customers, you will upset suppliers. Authenticity is fundamental. Absolutely.
So what does the future hold then for Quentin Kopp and Pollywood Limited?
Well, I can't keep
Sounds
doing.
exciting. I think it's going to get bigger and bigger, isn't it?
I can't keep doing this forever, but I mean, I think that keeping your brain active is a very important part of keeping your body active. When I was a trustee on the Coast Viola pension scheme, the actuaries would say those employees who do not think about post-retirement before they retire are in a wooden overcoat in 18 months, and they say thank you very much as actuaries, because that saves a lot of money for everybody else. But I don't know. I should just keep active. I should keep doing this. I mean, as you know, I also have another activity, which is the Orwell Society.
That's right.
Where I organise events. In fact, I've got 2 next in March. Yeah, it's about keeping mentally active.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Quentin, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you today. What I like to do is go through some of the messages that I'm taking away at the end of each of the interviews, and I've been scribbling away here a few things that you've said. I've already mentioned one about stay true to your values.
Absolutely.
That is the one that I've circled actually and put an asterisk next to, which is the big one. Be clear about your direction and have courage in that clarity.
Yeah.
Those 2 things for me are quite are huge, really, because it is so difficult when you're being pulled and pushed in different ways.
Yeah.
To try and take on somebody else's values and direction, and then you sit and wonder why things aren't moving forward. Well, you're going against intrinsically what you're about.
Well, the other very important thing, which I haven't mentioned, although incidentally I've probably demonstrated it, is you need a good sense of humour.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just to give you a very good example, going back a long time, I was negotiating with some shop stewards in a drop forge in the East End of Sheffield. And it was a very, very tense meeting with myself and the works manager and the 6 in the shop stewards committee. And they were very, very, very upset. And I knew we weren't going to achieve anything until I could break the atmosphere. And there's a speech mannerism in South Yorkshire of punctuating everything with "thanos," and the chairman of the shop stewards is a very bright young man. Well, he was about the same age as me at the time, so he was sort of mid-late 20s, and he had this speech mannerism enormously. And I just whispered to Ken, my colleague, I'm going to count how many "thanos" he does in the next minute. And when I said 45, we both burst out laughing.
That's a lot. In 1 minute.
And Paul said, this is serious. Why are you 2 laughing? I said, does thou know? Thou said 45 thanos in the last minute. Well, all the shop stewards burst out laughing then. We made progress. Yeah. Solved the problem.
Did he laugh? Did he find it funny?
Yeah. Paul took it. Well, but yeah, because you see, if you were straight with people, they respect that. I mean, I mean, another illustration from that company, from another plant. Liz and I went walking in Derbyshire. We went into this pub afterwards for a pint and something to eat. And there was a guy who'd been a shop steward 20 years early for me in the dye shop. And he turned around, he said, "We were only talking about you the other day." I said, "Why? Should my ears be burning?" He said, "No, there was a strike." And everybody said, and I was only there for just over 2 years, everybody said if Quentin was here, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. What a legacy.
Yeah. And well, you know about Mick Brunt. I mean, I still see those guys regularly.
Yeah.
We had dinner together with our wives the other day at Eversall. It's just about being straight with people, because you know everybody's the same as far as I'm concerned, and you're just doing different jobs. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
It does not matter what label somebody sticks on you. You know, so I'm
how can people get hold of you then? Give us your website address and your email addresses if you can, so people can tap into you and find out more about Pollywood and what you do.
Well, we've taken the website, we've taken our emails off the website because we got raided. But if you just put Quentin, if they put Quentin in front of Quentin at Pollywood-natural.com, that can get me.
Fantastic. Well, Quentin, thank you so much for giving your time today. I'm sure I'll be tapping into you again, as I do for various things over the year. You don't get away that easily. And we look forward to working with you and chatting to you again in the future.
Thanks very much, Marcia. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.